I had learned an important lesson. There was nowhere like Wellesley. After 6 years out in what people called the real world, meaning places that were not segregated by gender, aware of how men dominated all the spaces I lived in. Whether that was the board that I sat on for US Squash, the novels that would appear on the shortlist for the Pulitzer Prize during my time at HarperCollins, or the seemingly never-ending array of men that I worked for in the 2 independent schools where I taught. Sitting under that tent, waiting to hear Dr. Johnson speak, I tried to do something I rarely did as an undergraduate: relish the mostly female company that I was surrounded by. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Harvard's first president, Drew Gilpin Faust, both spoke, as did Dr. Vivian Pim, an African-American doctor and Wellesley alumna who was heading up the first women's health center at the National Institutes of Health. It's not a coincidence, however, that 4 years later, President Johnson's is the one that I remember the most vividly. She got up and talked about the importance of the liberal arts in a post-truth world. This was on the eve of the 2016 presidential election, a moment of special significance for the Wellesley crowd as one of our graduates seemed on the precipice of breaking that highest and hardest glass ceiling. Dr. Johnson covered it all: family, medicine, the life of the mind, why women's colleges still mattered, perhaps now than ever. And she did it all, pulling together threads from her life as a scholar, a public health expert, and a medical doctor. As someone who is now in the midst of their own doctoral program, I know how difficult that truly is. I returned to Wellesley that winter with about 20 of my students who were taking a course with me on women in politics. President Johnson carved time out of her day to sit with them, hear their questions, and discuss with them the challenges of women in leadership and how those challenges intersected with political life. Half the class wanted to apply to Wellesley by the time we finished the conversation. They were smitten with her. For one of conversation about how much she enjoyed hearing from a leader who looked like her, an occurrence that happened far too infrequently for her, if at all. A fierce advocate for women and social equity, President Johnson has spent her life's work elevating the significance of the lives of women through her scholarship, research. In the pandemic, after the death of a member of the Wellesley class of 2011, President Johnson spoke out about the social inequities that were going to make COVID-19 devastating to historically and systemically marginalized communities. She wrote, "The pandemic comes as a reminder of what we stand to lose when diverse voices go unheeded. Women, and women of color in particular, are on the front lines of this crisis in disproportionate numbers. Nearly 60% of the 700,000 jobs eliminated in March were held by women, according to data from the US Labor Department. People care more about and its costs than those directly affected. It's essential to have them at the tables where key questions are asked and significant decisions are made. This is especially true for today's youth, who will spend their lives cleaning up after the mess many of our leaders made in the decades leading up to this pandemic. This marked the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment securing women the right to vote, and this year is the 25th anniversary of the United Nations Beijing Conference on Women. Both moments in history suggested that a new, more equitable future lay ahead for women. Of course, now we are acutely aware of how women of color will not be able to fully realize their voting rights until 1965. The Beijing Conference on Women did not lead the kind of global collective action to better the lives of women and girls that we hoped it would. My hope for all of us tonight is that by communing, we're not only learning from a true thought leader in the fight for gender justice, but that we are also realizing our collective power. As President Johnson wrote, there will be a mess to clean up, but if we come together in our schools, our communities, and in our homes to demand that those in power either do what is needed or get out of the way, perhaps we will have a part in creating real systemic change in the wake of this disaster. It is my honor to be in conversation tonight with President Paula Johnson.
I'll just start by saying it's hard to believe that it's It feels like a lifetime ago that it was the fall of 2016, and so much has happened since then. We were going into that fall, as you said, thinking that we were going to elect our first woman president who was going to be a Wellesley alumna, and the world really turned upside down. And here we are now. So I really appreciate being in conversation with you to talk not only about where we've been, but the current situation and what we learn and how we move forward. Because I think, that is what we do. That is what we do at institutions where we are devoted to education, research, and practice. So it's great to be here.
Thank you very much. So we'll get started now. So we have 4 questions that I have prepared for Dr. Johnson, and then we have some questions from the audience that we will get to after that. So President Johnson, I'm sure that leading an institution has always had its challenges. Biggest challenge in being a leader during the pandemic?
So, this is something that none of us really have lived through, right, in this way, unless we were living in countries stricken really by Ebola, which was not all that long ago, but that, as we know, was not worldwide, devastating as it was. Um, it's been a fascinating and I would say exhausting journey. But in some ways, when we do get a chance to take a step back, I think we learn so much. We will learn so much from this moment. So, if I go back and I think about March, as the pandemic was really taking hold, um, the decisions that we had to make, particularly at the college, were pretty clear. I mean, we had to, for the safety of our communities, we had to send our students home. We had to send those who worked for us home. We really kept only essential operations moving. We had to pivot quickly to preserve our central mission, which is education. And everyone rallied, and we did that while also ensuring that our students who could not leave, whether they be international students or a significant number of students for whom Wellesley is their home address, or for whom it's not safe to go home. And so the first thing was to really, in that moment where the decision was clear, to really think about our core values, to think about the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we embrace. How were we, when a decision was clear, how were we going to really think about the different sectors in our community to ensure that we were thinking across the entire college? And I think in a moment as you're making these decisions, and we came to this over a few days, the final decision, we took all of that really to heart and thought very carefully about the actions we were going to take. What I think was interesting in those early days, and it's, I think, leading through a pandemic or any crisis, what was critical, and I think we did it, but we didn't do it as actively as we could have, was to really communicate as we were thinking, as we
Right.
were deliberating with our leadership. And, we wanted to be very careful, but while we were being careful and deliberative, there was, our community, and even if it was for 2 days, not really knowing what decisions or how we were thinking. And I think that's a learning. That's really something that we've worked very hard with our phenomenal communications team to really keep communications open as we've moved through the rest of these months, and will continue to do that. So one was really, identifying the values, and really being explicit about that. Second was remaining calm, really looking at the data, and then, as I said, really communicating the process along the way, even if you didn't have the final answer. And then, we then moved into the mode of, okay, we've moved over to remote education. Now what do we do? And that's, I think, where in many ways the hardest work has come, because what we've had to do is really adapt to a constantly changing landscape. And we've also had to really think about major decisions, probably some of the most, as myself and my colleagues say, one of the most consequential decisions we'll probably make during our presidencies, which is how to consider the fall for our students and our faculty and our staff. And moving through that total unknown with a shifting ground has really been a challenge. So, the first thing that is, we kind of moved from the most urgent to more, how do we move into the future? It's really creating what is the team, and who is the team around you. I have a phenomenal, over my 4 years, my initial 4 years. I've really, there were some phenomenal members of the team already in place, but I've really built what is an outstanding team. And I can't really just stress enough what that means, to have an outstanding leadership team who are truly your partners, your thinking partners, who even though the final decisions always lie with you, but who are really there to support each other and to make each other better, to jump in across areas. We are not siloed, and to give your all. So one is, kind of shoring up, and this is the work that has to be done prior, obviously, but getting that leadership team it's moments like this in which I could never do the work without it, or it would look very different. And then what are the other aspects of team that need to be created to deal with this kind of unknown? And I won't go through the details, but I think getting that structure in place and understanding the hierarchy and the work, where is the accountability, I think was another. We had to really take a step back and say, okay, we need to pause. And that's another. Pausing is important. We really needed to pause and put that structure in place. And so as we've moved through this, I think that structure has served us well, and it's allowed us to pivot quickly. And again, I'm going to come back to the communication piece, because we've communicated from the very beginning that the safety of our community, the health and safety of our community, the entire community, would come first in our decision making. Providing an outstanding academic program and educational experience for our students is central. And those were going to be the two guiding principles. And with that, I think, and being clear also that in a time of shifting realities, to expect change, to expect us to have to pivot at any given time. But we will be clear as to when that's happening, and we will also be clear about why we're making the change. And I think with that, I would say that we've moved through this in a way that, we've had to pivot. We've really worked with our teams. We've been nimble, and I would say, of course, um, nothing is perfect, but I would say that this has worked reasonably. The structure has worked reasonably well, as we have made the decision to bring about half of our students back to campus, and with a lot of infrastructure in place. The other half will be remote, but really providing an outstanding experience, and really investing in that experience for both of those groups.
Thank you. You're reminding me of, I think, the best piece of advice I got when I started working in boarding schools, which was a dean of students who told me not to worry alone. And it
Yeah,
sounds like you've created a team where nobody is working in isolation and no one's worrying alone, which I think is very important.
yeah.
So one of the things we've talked about in some of the previous chats is well-being, and I'm wondering what supports you've leaned on during this time.
Yeah. Well, it's really it's a good question, and as I've said, the leadership team is truly outstanding, and I would say that I hope that they would feel that we're a source of support for each other. Um, you know, there's both support and inspiration, right? And I think we have to, as we move through the work, we do have to pause again to take stock of the inspiration, because that inspiration is a type of support, right? So what do I mean by that? The stories of students who are at home, really doing, uh, whether it's helping their families or really figuring out opportunities to volunteer online, or thinking about different ways of contributing, um, those are inspiring stories. The fact that our faculty came together and rethought the entire curriculum and divided our semester into terms and was willing and ready to step up, that's a source of support, because you're not in this alone. You're not pulling, you're with, with the community. And our staff, we have a union, our union staff who, have maintained this campus, those who work in the dining halls, and some of the difficult decisions we had to make financially, but how do we then create ways to support our staff? So I think those have been sources of support, because it's really about the strength of the community. But I think more concretely, this has been a really interesting time, because I would say higher ed in Massachusetts has really come together in a most remarkable way. And we have been really a source of support for each other. You had mentioned in the intro, or Sarah Klein had mentioned, that I had been asked to be on the working group for reopening higher ed in Massachusetts. And through that, we not only created a small group, but we brought together all the presidents from across the state. And even though it was really through an organization that really focuses on the independent colleges and universities, we included the state schools, the UMass system. And we really worked together to not only advise the governor, but to really figure out a strategy that would benefit all of us. And when I say all of us, from the largest, most well endowed universities, and you know who those are, to the colleges that are struggling and are totally tuition dependent. And to say that we are in this together, and that what we can do for each other is figure this out, so that everyone has an opportunity. If you choose, everyone has an opportunity to have the resources to be able to, um, if they were choosing to repopulate their campuses, to do that. And that was really, I think, meeting with our colleagues, sharing the stories, but also sharing the resources, pulling on different fields and disciplines, which to me was very sustaining, because it kind of got you out of the day to day and allowed you to use your brain in different ways. For me, it was really about the science of testing and infectious diseases. And what I would say is we ended up then working with the Broad Institute and drawing on past relationships. The Broad Institute is one of the leading genomics institutes really in the world. And the leader of that institute, Eric Lander, has really worked to make testing available across the state for higher ed. And he's beginning to do the same work with K-12. So, I think that having that network of support in which we call each other, we ask each other questions, we share information, that has not been my experience in these 4 years. But I think that this crisis has let down everyone's guard and has allowed us into each other's space in a way that there is just tremendous mutual support. So, I think that it's really been quite an experience. And then, I can't say enough for in this type of a situation, of course, family and friends. But what I would also say is that, we each bring to whatever our professions are a network of friends in other fields. And it's important to keep those friendships alive as you're hunkered down, working really hard, but to keep them alive and to also get other perspectives. We have to be thinking about not only our world, but our world is not an insular one. And to really have other voices that we can tap into is just critically important. So I would say those are the ways that I've found some sustenance and support. In addition to the Calm app. So I don't know how many people downloaded the Calm app, but I find that from early morning till late in the evening on Zoom is totally exhausting. And there are times when I really feel I have to take a 20-minute break. And what I've found is using that Calm app to do a 20-minute or 15-minute meditation is really energizing if you're getting tired. And I think we have to listen to our bodies and take care of our bodies because we are only as good as we feel. So it's been important.
We had a couple comments in the chat. Many people echo your sentiments about the Calm app. Struck a nerve.
Yeah. I know I'm not supposed to be I'm sure there are other apps that are just as good. There are a bunch of meditation apps out there, but they're pretty good. They're also good. They've got great background noise. I have 2 children, and I just remember neither of my kids were sleepers, and I had one of those noise machines, and you'd put on the rain noise because finally thinking maybe it would help them to sleep. But with these weighty issues on your mind, sometimes you wake up at 3 in the morning with your mind racing, and using kind of the background rain on leaves or whatever it is that calms you is actually another really good thing. I mean, they're just really wonderful things that help you get the sleep you need, and so that you're able to move effectively through your days.
So switching a little bit in terms of what we're talking about, this is kind of more of a question about women and the lives of women. And obviously you're the head of, the Women's College. I'm a graduate, I can say that. So much has been written about the coronavirus pandemic being disastrous for societal gains made for women. We know that care work disproportionately falls to women, and with much of the care work support, women are opting out of promotions, careers, and even the workforce altogether in some cases. As the president of a women's college, how are you thinking about preparing graduates to face a society that will be more unequal when they graduate from Wellesley than it was when they arrived?
Well, this has been a very, very difficult time for women, and we see it not only in the jobs that women hold as the caregivers, in places that are quite difficult, but as those who, both at work and at home are the caregivers. And you know, I think that there are moments where, you begin to say, okay, it feels as if it's closing in. We've made so many gains. But I think we really have to use this moment also as a moment of inspiration and turn that around. And that is what my mantra is. That is what I truly believe. And Sarah, you talked about the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Obviously, Black women, were hidden. They were very active, but not really brought to the fore. Their contributions had not been really recognized. We also know that with Beijing, the 25th anniversary of Beijing, it's a powerful moment. And then with the pandemic and an election in which we had one of the most hopeful moments yesterday when Kamala Harris accepted the nomination for Vice President of the United States. And I think we have to really take this moment along with the Black Lives Matters movement and say, this is a moment for moving towards change, and that it's a wake-up call as opposed to um, allowing ourselves to um, feel a lack of hope in some of the gains that we've lost recently. I think we have to be motivated by this moment in time. And that is one, understanding the roots of the problem, right? We have got to understand that, the United States is a country that is not invested in the infrastructure that is so critical to women. Everything from public health, which has been defunded over years, except in the Obama administration, defunded over years, to never investing in childcare, elder care, all of these things fall towards women. How are we going to make this different? How are we going to understand the impact, the toll, as well as the opportunity for policy change moving forward? And I think for me, it's really about how do we educate our students to be critical thinkers, to analyze the problems at their root, to feel empowered so that they feel and know that they can make a difference all the way from the grassroots to eventually, hopefully, the C-suite. But in whatever that path is, whether it's or in the classroom. So what is that? What does empowering education mean? And I think that is what we do at Wellesley. How do we value engagement and civic engagement and really make that part of the program? That is something for us that's come out of this pandemic. We've actually started a new program that we usually have a January semester, the Sarah called winter session. And there are students who go abroad. There are students who do something called our Madeline Albright, her institute. We're in the process of developing a Clinton Institute. Every recent modern day Secretary of State has an institute at his or her home institution. We have 2 of the 3 women. I am going to get this in there. Not only do we have 2 of the 3 women, but I claim Condoleezza Rice too, because Madeleine Albright's father was her mentor. So, but to go back to the story, through our phenomenal civic engagement program and with our faculty, we have developed a remote program for first-year students all the way through seniors. And developmentally, it will work on developing your voice, public writing, ways to be engaged civically, and then as you move to a senior, what that leadership role looks like. So in the middle of the pandemic, I think what we've done is really say, this is a moment where we have to double down on ensuring that our students have are empowered, not just through education in the classroom, but we've got to really come up with an integrated strategy that gives them the tools they will need to make a difference in the world in whatever way they choose. So I just feel really strongly that's been central. And then I'll just say the other thing is, for the pandemic, we had planned on a very large, in partially in partnership with this civic engagement, a very large voting initiative, and we are still launching that. It'll be a really large initiative around Wellesley votes. And again, it is a way for us to make sure that our students are engaged. A lot are engaged volunteering virtually, some not, but I think some in person. But I think that in this anniversary, granted, voting doesn't answer all the questions, but it is fundamental to our democracy. And if we don't exercise that choice that so many died for, then we risk losing it, which I truly believe we are at risk of today. So those are just some of the things we're thinking about at Wellesley.
Great, thank you very much. A recent article was published in The Atlantic. The title of that article was "I'm a Nurse in New York and Teachers Should Do Their Jobs Just Like I Did." What struck me about this article was not so much the content. It was more the fact that it was a woman from another heavily feminized profession, which is nursing, attacking a group from a feminized profession, and used. Is there a way that feminized professions like teaching, nursing, social work, which are really at the forefront of the pandemic, can and should be thinking about coming together to demand a more just society? And what are ways that they can force those in power to ensure that the lives of women are visible and valued?
Well, first of all, Sarah, it is a sad day when that's the kind of statement that's made, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of my medical training. Way back when I'm a cardiologist, and it is a very male-dominated field, and it's in the days of the giants, and if I did it, you can do it. So just suck it up and do it. We know that that's not a good view, and I do think that first of all, there's a tremendous opportunity for coalition building, and as women in fields that face many issues that are very similar across fields. It is the time to recognize that power. I felt that after Donald Trump was elected and we had the Women's March, and there was really this outpouring of women across sectors, across socioeconomic status, et cetera, to come together. I think that's been dissipated in some ways. I think the Black Lives Matters movement has a capacity to bring us back together under another banner, but in a similar vein. And let's face it, these issues are pretty much, not all women obviously are facing racism, but many of the underlying issues are ripe for coalition building. And this is the moment to do that. And I really hope that we can see more movement towards that. I think, with the midterm elections, we saw the election of so many women to Congress. I think that clearly makes a difference. But I do think that there's an opportunity here, whether it's through grassroots organizing or through ways that various professional organizations get together. It's frequently how we identify. But are there ways for professional organizations to start working across those silos? I think in so many ways, those silos have divided us as if it's a zero-sum game. Well, guess what? We aren't, shouldn't be against each other because it's somebody else against us. And we have to recognize that. And that is, in the more final days of Martin Luther King's life, that was really it. It was about the Poor People's March. It was about the coalition building. And I do think that that piece is critical. And then I'm going to be honest with you, I think we also have to take individual responsibility, which is if we hear remarks in that way, in that vein, I think we have to have the courage in the moment to speak up about what the role should be, because um, if we don't take some steps and have some agency there, nobody's going to do it for us. It's really up to us.
Thank you. So we have our first audience question coming up, Dawn Krim. And Dawn, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to both President Johnson and the group and what your job is, where you're located, and then you can ask your question.
Dawn, oh, there you are. Hi, Dawn.
I think you're still muted, Dawn. There you go.
All right. I
No
wasn't
problem.
controlling it. Y'all are. Well, first and foremost, thank you for being here with us today. I know that we are fortunate here at UW to have wonderful speakers and speakers of the moment. And so, with your background in the fireside chat, we really appreciate you being here of the moment.
Well, it's
So, I'm Dawn Krim, and I'm in the PhD Educational Leadership Program at UW-Madison
stick.
by night. By day, I serve as the secretary for the Safety and Professional Services for the state of Wisconsin.
Wow.
So I've been on UW's campus for quite a while, and then started my degree in the evenings.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So my question for you is, and you've touched on it just a little bit, but as you think about the pandemics that we're experiencing, COVID as well as the racial inequities, what would you say is the role for higher education and for current college students as part of the solution?
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question, and I do think that really understanding the roots of the problem. I mean, this is to me ripe for higher ed, and ripe for really really getting down beneath the surface, understanding not just the present, but how did we get here? How did we get here to a point where our public health system is decimated? What happened? How did we get, even quite frankly, even today, as we talk about solutions, you rarely hear a conversation about rebuilding our public health infrastructure. We hear a lot about vaccines, and that is critically important. But the reason we're in such dire straits is because we have really horrendously poor public health infrastructure, and we have not really understood now how to manage something like a pandemic. So, really understanding the roots of the problems, understanding that connection between poverty, between at-risk jobs, and quite frankly, racism and the intersection of racism and sexism in the medical system as well as beyond. These have all come together in this pandemic. And using our really intellectual and research power, using our classrooms, to really dig into these issues as case studies, and to really, I think, empower our students to think about these as complex problems that do have a path forward. We may not know the full solution, but the solutions really are multifactorial and require an interdisciplinary approach. And there's a big study that was done probably now about 4 or 5 years ago by Gallup to really look at what led to the greatest kind of sense of fulfillment for students who had graduated from college several years later. One was having at least one professor who really cared about them. Another was having a real life experience that allowed them to really think about what it would be like out in the world. And the third was really thinking about how some experience in really getting into and attacking a complex real life problem, to put what they're learning to work to solve the problems of today. Our young people today want to see a better world. We need to give them the tools to work in this complex setting, because none of these large problems are going to be solved by one area or one discipline or one industry, but to give them the tools to understand the complexity and their role in that. Now, what was interesting was that the only, I think, about 17% of students actually had all three. And I think that's something for us to really think about. And I think this pandemic serves as a really important touch point for us to think about, what is it that we're teaching? How are we enabling our students to think in these complex models? And how are we giving them the tools they need to make the difference that they really do want to make? Thanks.
Thank you. So Sheila Briggs, I think, is also on this call, and she had a question prepared as well.
Can I just add one last quick thing, because I do.
Absolutely.
I'm as you know, the voting piece is critical, and I do think we do have to engage our students and make kind of the whole civic engagement, the responsibility one carries when one is given the privilege of going through a college experience. What is that responsibility to engage civically and have your voice heard? And again, central to that for the United States is voting. So I'll just thanks. Who's next?
Thanks for adding that. So, hi, I'm Sheila Briggs, and I also am a graduate of UW-Madison. I got my undergrad and my doctorate there. And so, thank you so much for joining us today.
What did you get your doctorate in?
Educational leadership and policy analysis.
Wonderful.
So, I am currently the Assistant State Superintendent at the Department of Public Instruction, so K-12.
Oh my goodness.
But also interact with higher education with educator preparation programs is one of the things that I also oversee. You have mentioned multiple times describing this moment. And I too share this deep belief that this is an important moment for us. So the question that I have for you is, how do we simultaneously kind of get through the challenge of what we're facing likely for at least the next school year in both K-12 and in higher education, while also planning forward for a real kind of complete re-envisioning of education for kind of post-COVID, so that we do take advantage of this moment? Or is that too linear in our thinking? But I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about hand sanitizer and masks, And
Mhm.
I want to talk about, how to tear down racist structures and build a system of education that works for all kids. So how do we tackle all of that kind of at once?
Sheila, it's a great question, and it's something that we are grappling with as well. So let me just share with you. So at Wellesley, because this is the moment to do that, right? But how do you make the space? Um, and when you're so deep in the day to day, and just keeping it all going. We started at Wellesley our strategic planning process last year. And the goal was the plan had been that this October, so October of 2020, the board would vote on our new strategic plan. And we were kind of on our way. Our working groups were moving along, and then came the pandemic. And when we came up for air after the initial kind of flurry, the question was what to do. And after reflecting on this, I strongly felt that one, that we were probably in the perfect place. And why was that? Because if we had finished the plan before the pandemic, well, gee, the world is changing, and there's a lot of aspects of education, a lot of things that our minds are open to now that they were not open to, that we wouldn't even have thought of. And so, really, I think we would have missed an opportunity, to be honest. And I think we would have looked at that plan and would have said, life is really different. If we had not started at all, it's kind of hard to start after a pandemic if you're going to start after. But, we're in the middle. And what I would say is more modern day planning really is more of a continuous process. I mean, we have a strategic planning process, but planning is and kind of keeping the future in mind, but really thinking about the next couple of years is something that is constantly happening. So I strongly believe what we are doing is really carving out the time. I'm in active conversation with our faculty who have stated that they would rather move forward. I did put it to them. Do you want to wait? How do we? They said no. These are the leaders of our working groups. They said no. Let's move forward. Our board is on board. Our leadership team is on board, and we're in the process really of just carving out the time to do some of this reflection as we're living through this, and to integrate that into envisioning a different future, a future built on strength, but a future that really does kind of open up different and new possibilities. So let me give you one example. You know, if you had asked us how we thought about remote education, I think that would never have made it into thinking about how we think about our curriculum moving forward. I can tell you that we had an extraordinarily successful summer school that had unintended positive consequences, which were we had students who could work, who really could access education in the summer in a way that they would never have been able to do it. The innovation that has happened in terms of different types of subjects that never would have imagined being taught online. The much more rigorous ideas of hybrid teaching, I think, have been now undertaken. So I'm just going to use that as one small example, but there are many ways in which this pandemic and the economic crisis and the other aspects, Black Lives Matter, we are inclusive excellence has been a very important priority at Wellesley since it's always been a priority, but I think we've really made some real progress in the past 4 years. How do we now take that to another level and really think about anti-racism and really make headway in areas where, quite frankly, we just haven't made the kind of progress we want. And I think there's the will to do this across departments. If we don't do this now, I think we lose an opportunity. So I think we have to carve out the time. We've got to pull people together. And I think they will be grateful for it because it gives them an opportunity to be pulled out of the day to day. You have to give them the space, though, to do it, right? You have to provide the time. And it gives them people an opportunity to envision a future and think about what they're learning. So I would say go to it, and it is the time.
Thank you.
So we have a question in from Jill Weller-Riley. Jill, would you mind asking your question to President Johnson? And my guess is this will probably be our last question of the evening.
Jill, where are you?
I'm trying to unmute. Just give me a second. I apologize. My video seems to be giving me trouble, but thank you so much for meeting with us today. It's been a joy listening to you and very informative. And while your experience is in, it sounds like mostly higher ed, I come from a K-12 public school experience. And I love your comments on civic engagement and the role that higher ed can play there. But I just view the K-12 environment to be one that can really engage a larger community of students and teach our, all of our kids of all socioeconomic levels to engage civically. Unfortunately, my experience has been that the anger that currently exists in our culture is getting in the way of that, to encourage students to engage in conversation about modern events and civic duty always brings some sort of repercussions. And I'm just hoping that in this age of invigorated Black Lives Matter movement, we can kind of strike while the iron's hot and maybe get back to that. And if you have any thoughts or advice on the K-12 system, that we could bring back to our local communities, I would love to hear that.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jill. And, I would say that this is an issue that we all are dealing with. So the polarization in our society today, it does make talking across difference more difficult. And I think you can see a kind of conversations just dissipate. This is work that we are undertaking also at Wellesley, which is, how do we really learn to have more common ground? We have a whole program in mediation for our student leaders in the dorms. We have a fabulous dean of students who's a PhD in counseling psychology, and she is really, with her team, really worked on creating this program that allows peers to begin to understand difference, how to negotiate difference, and that's in the residence hall. So it's, kind of not in the classroom, but just day to day, how do we negotiate difference? Because, some of it is political, but some of it is also that we're producing a generation that actually don't talk to each other. They aren't practiced in talking with each other. And I do think that is where K-12 can have some really important impact with, it's not just about texting somebody or emailing or whatever, Instagramming or whatever is being done. but what is conversation? What is having conversation where there's common ground? And I do think that there's opportunity there in K-12. Actually, um, uh, uh, one of our alums, Cheryl Hayward, who's just a phenomenal educator. She came out of a law background, left law, and is a middle school teacher, and she's taken this on as a real passion and has a lot of resources. So um, I might, maybe I can give Sarah her contact information, and I actually have some of her books that she didn't write the books, but she gave them to me because even though they were really for K-12, I found them very helpful to give me some and to give us some sense of how we might approach this work. As you know, there's been a lot of issues in higher ed, but it starts young, and I think if we can start younger, then we're not asking people to change your opinion, right? Or your beliefs. What we're asking you to do is to be open to conversation and to learning um, different perspectives, fact, interpretation, and that starts young.
Thank you so much. And I would love if you could share with Sarah that information. I would love that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I'll definitely follow. Jill was a classmate of mine. We both graduated from the master's program at the University of Pennsylvania.
Ah, great. Wonderful.
Yeah, so I think that brings us to the end. That went quickly. I think a lot of folks were wrapped by everything that you had to say, President Johnson, and you continue to make all Wellesley graduates everywhere really proud of your leadership right now in this very difficult time. I marvel at how lucky the college is to have you right now and how lucky we are to have your voice in this moment. So thank you again for taking the time to meet with us today.
Well, Sarah, it was my honor, and you make me proud. You make Wellesley proud, and it was truly a pleasure to be here. And Sarah Klein, I want to thank you as well. Thank you.
I'm going to show just that clip of your talk to my mother so that she. Yeah. So to everyone that joined us. Website for information coming about the Women's Leadership Incubator in July of 2021, where we hope to continue the work that we've built on this summer. And with that, that closes our final session of the summer. I can't believe how quickly it's back in May. We didn't think we'd be here, did we, Sarah?
Well, listen, I just want to wish everyone, in whatever your fields, whatever you're doing, really stay well, and the work you're doing is really extraordinary. So thank you.